I read it on my Kobo new device. This was my first book that I read on it. So I want to let you guys know my thoughts on this book. First off, I feel like if you like a dramatic book with a lot going on, kind of like soap opera in a book, then you will love this book. It's pretty good. It's considered urban fiction, and overall I would probably rate this book an 8 out of 10. So let's go over some of my thoughts. Right away in the book, the tone that is being set, that Raven urgently needs to get away from her boyfriend for the sake of her child, and she's tried to leave before, but she always comes back. That's the tone that's being set right away, and then we learn more as we progress throughout the chapters why Raven feels like she needs to leave her boyfriend. So the reason why I believe the author named this book A Moth to a Flame is because moths are attracted to light, and a flame has a lot of light to it. But little does the moth know that the light that is attracting it is also what's going to bring it its demise or danger. And I think Raven is similar to that because she's attracted to, somewhat toxic traits that she doesn't know will, be basically the ruin of her life. Learn a lot about Raven and her views of her father, Benny, who is similar to the type of guy that Raven ends up falling for. His name is Mizan. Either Mizan or Mizan. So anyhow, Benny, which is Raven's father, he's very strict with her growing up, but he was a drug dealer, and he views himself as superior to her boyfriend, Mizan, because he feels like, he's like real street, and, he's got some authenticity to him, whereas he views Mizan as fake but also dating. Raven is very much a daddy's girl, so that kind of explains why she's kind of attracted to Mizan, because they have some similarity, but they're not completely the same. I believe that Raven was initially attracted to Mizan through seeking validation from him. Raven does have a best friend, and her best friend is Nikki, and they're like ride or die type, and they always holding it down for each other. Benny realizes something is up with Mizan before anything ever goes down, but what really made him very suspicious is when Raven invites Mizan to like a cookout that they have, or like some kind of family function, and his house ends up being invaded, and that's never happened to Benny before. He's usually tight with his stuff, and the only thing different, he points out, is that Mizan was there, and as payback Benny ends up killing the invaders, as well as the invaders' closest level. So from the very beginning, readers start to question, like, why is Raven attracted to danger? And Raven does explicitly say, like towards the beginning at least, that she loves how he commands her and keeps her in check. So I do want to hear from you guys, like, why do you guys think that Raven is attracted to that kind of man? Mizan ends up orchestrating a fake robbery, and he basically tricks Raven into giving the passcode to her father's safe, and in that process he ends up robbing the father, taking his money. He ends up leaving something behind for the police to discover, and the police end up killing Benny when they try to arrest him. And it's also important to note that prior to Raven giving her father's code to the safe, Raven did end up basically choosing Mizan over her family, because there was a big argument when the father, Benny, told Raven to stop seeing him, and she kind of just like left, partially because he said, if you aren't going to follow my rules, then get out. But she left, and she was desperate for a place to be, so she stayed with Mizan. When Benny ended up dying, Mazan wasn't very understanding at first. Like, basically, he was mad because she was missing the phone calls, and that was started, abusing her. And I believe that was the first time that he's done that. And the reason why he did it is because, she missed the calls. And Mazan kind of responds to her grief by saying, "Everything's good, Ma. The world is mine, and as long as you're loyal, I will share it with you," which is kind of a suspicious. It's like, setting off alarms in my head. So I don't know how Raven, skipped out over that. So some of the warning signs as the story progresses, some of the other warning signs that Raven encounters of like a toxic relationship is Mazan basically contacting the phone carrier to block the family's number so that he can't get in contact with her. He didn't show up for the father's funeral, and he basically said, well, I didn't stand with him in real life, so why would I go to his funeral? Like, I'm gonna keep it G no matter what. It was more about him, and instead of supporting Raven, he intentionally did things to knock down her confidence. Basically, his mindset was that only his opinions and thoughts mattered, and whenever she vocalized anything different, that's when he used that tactic to break down her confidence. There is a conversation that Raven does have with her mom about the abuse, and the mom kind of says, like, no guy is perfect. Your father has done things that were bad too, even though she denies him being abusive. One quote that really stood out to me in the book, though, in that conversation with the mom, was, "A woman can't change a man, but a man can change a woman in the worst ways." So I wanted to hear y'all's thoughts on that quote, but that really resonated with me. Another red flag is the drug usage, like immediately into the relationship. Mazan is trying to get her hooked on to drugs that she does not typically use, which of course can make her easier to control. Other warning signs, he also gets her financially dependent on him and doesn't really allow her to have money to herself outside of asking him for permission. Basically, he controls her outfits. He even says at one point through the book, is the only way you're leaving me is not breathing. So later on in the book, Raven's mother ends up committing suicide and also ends up getting pregnant, and he tries to get her pregnant intentionally to control her more, but she ends up miscarrying because of all the abuse emotionally and physically that she has to endure. There is a scene where Mazan basically puts a bomb underneath Ethic's car, which Ethic, I forgot to mention Ethic, but Ethic is someone connected with her dad, and he's like higher up, has more status than the dad, but nobody, like, they don't really know until the end, or at least the reader knows earlier on, but Mazan doesn't know until the end of the book that Ethic is of higher status. And the reason why Mazan ends up trying to bomb or put a little detonator underneath Ethic's car is because he's trying to take out anyone associated with the father so that he can get to the top. So in that incident where Ethic's car is like bombed or whatever, Raven ends up running back, and somehow she gets caught up in the shuffle, and they take her to the hospital. When Raven's in the hospital, the police is coming to arrest the mother for basically being complicit with her father's drug operations, and the mother basically puts the responsibility on Raven to make sure that her little sister Morgan is okay. So she transformed from being like her, a young lady thinking about herself to a young lady with, a child essentially to think about. I am curious, to the readers who have read this book already, like, what do you think Raven's rock bottom moment is? So Raven ends up having a stillbirth, because like I said, she endures a lot of stress and trauma from the relationship. One question that was brought to my attention was, like, what could the stillbirth represent metaphorically? And I think it could represent a loss of innocence. Or the older that Morgan gets, and the more Morgan drops little breadcrumbs that she's kind of picking up on what Mazan is putting down, or the way he's treating her. I think that's really what inspires Raven for change, and encourages her to do better, because she doesn't want Morgan to think that this is normal and that it's okay for a man to treat her like that. I think that chapter where Raven learns about Mazan setting her up, along with the fact that her mother died by suicide and he wasn't really there emotionally for her, I think all of that kind of layered to set the scene for Raven to get the strength to leave, or mentally prepare her to leave. Raven starts fighting Mazan back. She tells him, like, I'm not taking your punches no more, so every time you basically hit me, be prepared to receive something back, because I'm not taking it. Raven ends up meeting with Ethic and Morgan to plan an escape, and she ends up getting away successfully from Mazan. She ends up moving to a different state where Ethic also lives, because Ethic, I forgot to mention, but in the beginning, she had a love interest in Ethic before Mazan, but Ethic really wasn't interested in her. She wasn't his type, or so he thought. Raven ends up moving to the state with Ethic, and from there he starts to realize that he kind of does have feelings for Raven, and Raven also does have some of the same toxic, I would say, mindset, where she feels like she has to have a man to save her, needs validation from a man. Two of the things that kind of set her up for taken advantage of. Ethic is hesitant though at first to express his feelings with Raven, because she did some traitorous, backstabbing, unloyal stuff to her father. So he is hesitant. He doesn't want to bring that danger, because we find out that Ethic actually has a daughter as well. But eventually he gives in to his desire, and he also gets her a home, a car, and all that other stuff. And he does that, though, the home and the car, prior to admitting his desire. But there is some change in Raven, because she doesn't necessarily want Ethic to do all this for her. She wants to try to get her life together on her own a little bit. So she does pay Ethic rent back, so that she feels like she has a place that she can call her own. And then she ends up deciding to go back to school. I'll leave it to mystery how Raven ends up getting away, but obviously, even though she got away, Mazan isn't happy about it, and he's ready to come after her. He ends up being able to get her back to her original state, which is Flint, by the way, Flint, Michigan. We do find out prior to him coming after her that she's pregnant. She lies to him and tells him that it's his son, but really it's her and Ethic's son. She ends up plotting a way to get out, though, again, from the situation. Long story short, the ending is basically her getting away from Nikki helps her. She ends up taking Mazan's car to the meetup spot that her and Ethic are supposed to be at, so that she can escape. And because they basically took his car because they couldn't find Raven's keys, and his car had tinted windows so nobody could see inside. Ethic had actually put a bounty basically on Mazan's head, so the guys, they thought that they were following Mazan, but they were actually following Raven and Nikki in the getaway car. Basically, they ended up shooting it up, and Raven and Nikki ends up dying. The baby ends up surviving. So that's pretty much what happened. That's pretty much a summary and my thoughts on the book. I think it's a really good book. I think it's got a lot of stories within the story, so it was a very interesting book. I would probably read it again. So yeah, those are my thoughts. Make sure you guys answer those questions though that I posed in the comments below, and let me know if you guys have any questions for me. Thank you for watching. Bye-bye.